with you guys and get to know you, so I don't have too many opportunities. So if you don't know me, I just want to show you a picture of my family. My wife, Christina, we have a little 2.5-year-old Sammy, and then we have 2 crazy dogs. So this is my wife's little lap dog. Her name is Maya, and then we have our crazy lab retriever who is Coco, and she's a little bit more my dog. But that's my family. I just wanted you guys to know that I appreciate you being here today. I appreciate you guys coming and hanging out on a Sunday night and just having this time that we can go and we can talk, worship together, get to know each other a little bit, and also have some time where we can get into Scripture and look at God's Word. I never was a part myself of a youth ministry or a youth group in church. I grew up in the church. I went to Sunday school, and then as soon as kids ministry ended, I felt like, oh, I'm supposed to move up to youth group, and I'm not as cool as the high schoolers and stuff like that. So I chickened out and I didn't go. And then like week after week, I was like, oh, maybe I'll go next time. Maybe I'll go next time. And I never ended up going. And there was this big spot in my life where I was never a part. I never had peers that I was worshiping alongside. And eventually, church kind of felt like I gotta go and do this, but to be honest, don't enjoy it at all, and it's really boring, and I don't know anyone, and why go at all? And so for you guys to be here, I'm excited that you personally are here. And if you're watching at home, I'm glad that you're making time for this as well. But it's really important that we go through the Christian life with other people. And even if church, there's ups and downs to it, it's a really good and important thing to be with a community and involved in our lives. I share this with you because and I don't want to speak totally in past tense, but especially during that time when I was in junior high and high school, and even now, there was a sense that I had that I was a little bit inadequate. Like I didn't quite have enough, or there was something about me that maybe wasn't totally acceptable. Like I mentioned, I wasn't quite as cool as the high schoolers, or maybe other people wouldn't like me as much if I started going, and maybe I wouldn't be as popular, or maybe I'd make a joke that wasn't funny and everyone would just look at me, or what if I wasn't as good looking as someone? And there was a sense that I had, and even that I still have, that what if I really let people know who I was, like if people could really see my thoughts and knew who I was deep down inside, that maybe I wouldn't be as accepted as I would hope. Maybe that there's a part of me that people just can't really love. And I wonder if there's a sense that you can identify with that. I wonder if there's a part of you that says, I need to go and I need to push hard and I need to strive and I need to find a way to compensate for that sense of inadequacy that I have. And so that way, if I do enough, maybe people will like me. Maybe people will accept me and maybe I can be part of the group. See, a lot of times the ways that we compensate for this is through trying to achieve and trying to perform things. So let me give you an example of this is what my senior year in high school looked like. And just as a heads up, I went to a small school. Like there were 13 kids in my graduating class. I grew up in a little town out in the desert. My senior year, I was ASB president, I was valedictorian, I was homecoming king, and I was MVP of my basketball team. So there was, the way that I responded to feeling inadequate was, I want to be really good at things. And if I'm good at things, then people are going to be like, oh, Daniel's cool, Daniel's popular, Daniel's a good kid, he's respectable, and maybe then I'll earn people's acceptance if I achieve enough things. And what I'm wondering is, Do you feel like that sometimes? Do you feel like there's a part of you that people wouldn't really accept if they got to know, and so you need to find a way to kind of cover up and make up for that? I wonder if it feels a little bit like if you ever played poker before. Like I know this is church, but if you ever played poker or some kind of card game where you have a deck of you have a couple cards in your hand, and you need to kind of bluff and pretend you don't want other people to know what you're holding, and so you gotta kind of keep a straight face, or you gotta kind of be like shaking your head like, oh yeah, I'm gonna win this hand, but you're looking at your cards and you're like, I got the worst deck. That like I got a 2 and a Joker card. That's not even supposed to be in there. Like what's going on right now? And I wonder if there's sometimes a sense that we feel like, man, I'm looking at myself and I don't feel like I'm as good as other people. Like I'm looking at myself and I feel like, man, other people have so much more. They're so much more gifted, or they're so much better at X, Y, and Z than me. And why would anyone want to hang out with me? Why would anyone accept me if they knew the cards that I was holding? See, the gospel fortunately talks about this. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what does Scripture say about this sense of inadequacy that we have, this sense that we aren't worthy and we can't be loved. Because this is a deep question and it reveals something about our identity. See, there's kind of 2 ways that we can respond to this sense of inadequacy that we can have. We can respond the first way, which is the most common way that we respond. And that's, we say our identity is based on our characteristics, or like our attributes. So you're a good student, so your identity is based on being able to get good grades, gain a good education, and then maybe you'll get a good job later on in life. Maybe your identity is based on something in sports or something athletic, like you do well in basketball or football, and so that's who people know you as. You're the jock at school, and so everyone likes the jock. And if you do well enough in sports, people will like you. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's being like the good Christian kid. You always go to church. You never swear. You never get caught gossiping or any of the other like taboo sins that we identify. See, the problem is if that's what our identity is based on, if it's based on an attribute, there's never any security or stability. Like there's always another test, there's always another game, there's always some other awkward situation where maybe you might do something that looks bad. All you can do is kind of meet the threshold and live for another day, and then next week, maybe something else is going to happen. There's no security in that, and it's also never fulfilling. See, the really sad part about this is not only is it not fulfilling, but it's something that often you're gifted in, and you hold on to it so tightly that it gets to the point where you no longer find joy in it, and you can even start resenting it. Like if you are good at sports, if that becomes your identity, pretty soon, at some point, the joy of that sport kind of loses itself. And it can even get to a point where you start resenting, like, man, I'm sick of this sport. Like, it never really brings any lasting joy, because I'm under so much pressure that there's always the next game and I can always do better than what I did. It's exhausting and it's tiring, but it seems like there's no other option. See, I want to look at a little bit of what Scripture says about it. In the New Testament, Paul at one point has a conversation with some Jews. And for the Jews, the law was essentially the thing that they were holding to. It was essentially what they were basing their identity on. The Jews identified the law because they were the only group of people that was given the law. God didn't give that, didn't reveal that to anyone else. And by law, I'm talking about the Mosaic law, when God gave Moses the 10 Commandments and a bunch of other rules and said, follow these things. And the Jews thought, if I follow these things faithfully, this is what's going to make me not just a good person, but acceptable and righteous and distinct from other people. This is what my identity is following the law. So I want to read to you this verse in Galatians. And look at what Paul says about the law and its relationship to Christ. And can we throw that up? In Galatians 2:21, he says, I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing. See, right now we're reading righteousness. Righteousness here is the same connotation as like acceptance or worthiness. You know, so if I could be accepted, if I could be accepted, if I could be loved, if I could be a part of the group, if I could be included through the law, then there was no reason for Christ to die. See, the Jews, if they could really follow the law sufficiently, then there was no reason for Christ to die. So if there was actually success that could be had by the Jews following the law, then Christ's death was pointless. See, it helped them feel in the moment righteous and distinct, but it was temporary, and it was never something that they could truly follow. There was always going to be shortcomings, and it was never going to be enough. See, instead of Moses' law, like the Jews followed, we don't follow that, but we set up our own rules. We set up our own things that we follow. And so whether it's our identity as a student, or our identity as sports, or our identity as being popular or good looking, or being a good kid, we put our hopes in these other things in order to be acceptable. And this really sad part about when we do those things and when we really trust in those things and ultimately idolize those things is what we're actually saying is, I don't need Jesus. I don't need what he did. That Jesus' death on the cross, it's irrelevant to me. It's unnecessary. Because I can make myself acceptable by the things that I do. I can make myself someone who is worthy of love and being included. See, I think one of the really hard parts about this is that sometimes we can come with a sincere heart and think, okay, I'm not going to try to perform for God. I'm gonna accept what he did on the cross, but I just want to make sure I hold up my end of the bargain. And so imagine for a second, like God is over here on this mat, and that's what being over there means, what it means to be accepted. And I'm over here unacceptable. And so what I think a lot of times is, oh, I need to make sure I hold up my end of the bargain, so I'm just going to go halfway. And I'm just going to come and stand over here and and I'm just going to do enough. I'm going to be a good enough person. I'm gonna push myself hard enough so that I do good things and I succeed in whatever I'm trying to do. And then God's gonna see that I'm trying, and so he'll come and he'll meet me halfway. But he expects me to come this far. And still, when we do this, what we're ultimately doing is we're trying to walk the whole way. We just can't make it that far. The gospel is saying, no, we're still over here. And God walks all the way over, picks us up, and carries us over to the acceptable side. That's what the gospel is. So and we can do this with such a sincere heart and think, no, I just want to make sure that I'm not being too passive and that God's not like waiting for me to kind of get up on and like pull myself together and get serious about my faith. And so sometimes we can think like, oh, God's just waiting for me to get a little bit more serious. And what we're ultimately sometimes doing is we're trying to jump ahead of God, and we're doing nothing different than thinking we can make ourselves acceptable. when we depend on our performance for value, we end up dismissing our need for Jesus because we don't need him anymore to make ourselves acceptable or have worth. See, this is one of the ways that we try to establish our identity. But the gospel gives us an alternative. And it also shows us how God shows up. See, if one option is saying, I'm going to trust in my attributes or my characteristics, the other alternative that the gospel gives us is saying, I'm going to trust what Christ did for me. So let me show you another verse. This is going to be in 2 Corinthians 5:17. It says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old has gone, the new is here. See, part of the gospel means that you have a new nature. It means the old that's gone, that means that's that old sinful self, and you now have this new heart that's been given to you. You have new desires. You've been made a new person. You've been brought from this unacceptable side to the accepted side. And notice that he says the new is here, like this has happened. Like it's something that's a certainty. So our old self says that we need these crutches or these idols to have value and define us. And Paul is saying here in this passage, no, that doesn't describe you anymore. Look, like it's good to try hard in all the endeavors that you have. But we don't need to make those things what gives us value and what our identity is based on. Instead, what we need to do is we need to trust that God keeps his promises of what he said is true about us. And here, what he says is true about us is that he says, you've been moved over here. What's true is you belong over here. You're accepted. You don't have to strive anymore. You don't have to push yourself and try to find your own acceptance. You've already been accepted. I want to give you an example of what this looks like. Apparently this has become a whole trend, and I am rarely ahead of the curve when it comes to what things are popular, but there was this whole craze about sourdough bread making. Did anyone's parents or did anyone here get involved? Did anyone do sourdough? Okay, just as parents. I am proud to say, Chris, they did it too? So I am proud to say I started sourdough bread making a couple of months before it became a thing. And then I became like really mad because I ran out of flour and I couldn't find any because everyone was buying flour and making sourdough bread. But part of what I like to do is usually on Fridays or Saturdays, I like to make bread. So I do it about once a week because there are few things that are better in life than fresh baked bread. And I'm white, so that means I like bread and I like cheese, and so I enjoy like going in and getting like my snobby cheese from the store and something that stinks and eating it, and that brings me pleasure. So what I like to do is, you go to the store and you buy some flour, and I'm gonna need a third image for this, so I'm gonna yell for a second. So I have some flour with me. When you make bread, you start off with, you have 4 ingredients that you need for bread making. So you have your flour. You have, anyone know the other ingredients? Yeast. We need yeast. We need water, and we need salt. So you don't need much. Not a lot goes into bread making. It's pretty straightforward. Now, the thing with flour, though, is flour in and of itself, there are few redeeming qualities for flour. Like if you were stuck in the wilderness and you had a bag of flour, you'd be screwed. Like there wouldn't be a whole lot you could do with it. And like look at this. It's like chalky. it's dry, it's messy, like it gets everywhere. It's like really dusty whenever you're doing stuff with flour. It like gets up in the air and you're copying and it gets all over the place. You gotta like wipe everything down a whole bunch afterwards. Like there's not a whole lot that's redeemable by itself about flour. Like nobody goes and like eats flour by itself and they're like, oh man, this is like fresh out of the oven flour. Boy, like mom, you went all out for this meal. Like nobody does that. But when you add other things to it, when you add yeast to it, yeast starts breaking down the flour and the carbohydrates that are in it, and it becomes simpler sugars. The yeast ferments it, and so you start getting carbon dioxide, so it gets a little fluffier. As you knead it, there's proteins, which is gluten, that starts forming, and it starts becoming softer, and it stretches a little bit more. And then by the time you finish, check out this. Then you get something that looks like this. And let me tell you, when you pull fresh bread straight out of the oven, there's this smell that like fills the house. And there are few smells that are as good as fresh baked bread. And so you have like this nice crispy crust on it, and then you have like this soft kind of chewy texture, and it's wonderful. But this is fundamentally and chemically even different than flour. Like you start off and you're looking at flour and you're just like what do I do with this? There's nothing edible about this. There's nothing like exciting about flour. There's nothing delicious about this. But then you look at bread and you're like, man, fresh baked bread, that's kind of a special thing. It's really good. And the sad thing is, I think as Christians, like we go through this fundamental change where, we used to be flour. Christ makes us through the gospel into like this fresh baked bread, but sometimes we still think of ourselves as though we're still flour. Like sometimes we still look at ourselves and we're like, man, I'm kind of chalky and dusty and I don't taste very good, and I'm kind of gross and useless, and what am I supposed to do with my flour? And Christ is saying like, hold up, no, I've changed you. Like the old is gone, you're not flour anymore. I've done deep work in you. Like I've made you into something new. I've made you into this delicious bread that's like straight out of the oven, and there's a purpose for you. So sometimes when we think about ourselves and we think like, wait, why is it that I still sin though? Like if the old is gone and the new is here and I have this new identity, sometimes we just keep thinking that we're still flour. And it takes a while for us to trust more and more that no, Christ did this work already. Like there's a reality that already I have this new nature. See, if the gospel means that I've been made acceptable, so how then am I supposed to keep living without going back to performing? Like, how do I live over on this map where it says I'm acceptable and I don't need to strive anymore and chase after things? How do I keep those idols away and still do things, still strive, still use all my gifts, but how do I keep them from becoming idols? And I want to look at a verse, and there's a phrase that you've heard probably 100 times. But I want to spend a moment looking at it. Can we go to the next slide? So this is jumping back to Galatians. It says, clearly, no one who relies on the law is justified before God, because this is the phrase that I'm talking about. The righteous will live by faith. So remember a couple verses ago, I said when we see like righteous or righteousness, what I want us to think of is like being acceptable, being worthy. He says the righteous, so here he's talking about people who have been made righteous. He's talking about Christians, and he says that they will live by faith. I think I want to notice, what I want you to notice about this phrase is I want you to notice the verb tense. Like, going English class on you right now. Notice he says, the righteous will live by faith. What I want you to notice about this and take from this is a lot of times when we think about the gospel, what we think is kind of in past terms. Like, oh, I've heard the gospel, I've heard that Christ has died for me, I've heard that he'll forgive my sins, I've heard that he rose from the dead, I can trust in him and go to heaven. And we think, oh, I trust in that, I have faith in that, and now I live my Christian life going forward. And the gospel is just kind of like the fundamentals which you hear at the very beginning of your Christian life, you know, and then you move on from there. Here, though, he's saying, like, hold on, faith is something that you are living by. The gospel is relevant every single day of your life. What he's saying is, every day we need to come back and think, do I believe the gospel? Am I believing, like, am I actively believing the gospel and what the gospel says about it? Like, do I really believe that my sins are forgiven? Or am I trying to find ways to compensate and make up for the mistakes I've made? Do I really believe that I'm accepted and that I'm over here? Or am I still living over here and trying to find ways to compensate for the inadequacies that I feel like I have? Do I really carry around this sense of shame with me that I'm alone and I'm the only one that sins and struggles and I need to get through this on my own? See, these are the things that he's talking about, where he's saying, the righteous will live by faith. You need to live in faith, believing in the gospel every single day. The gospel isn't just something you believed in the past. It's something that we need to keep believing. We need to keep believing that God really looks at you and he's actually on your side. He actually wants what's best for you. That God actually loves you, and not just loves you like, oh, I love you, like you're great. It's no, like he says things like he has more thoughts about you than sand on the shore, than stars in the sky. That's the kind of love that God has for you. Are those things that we really believe, or do we just kind of forget about that and keep thinking, okay, I believed, okay, that means I'm going to heaven, but ultimately, I'm still kind of over here, and, I must disappoint God a fair amount because I still have issues if I'm honest. Or, do I still stay over here that I don't really belong at church or among my Christian brothers and sisters, because they don't know how many issues that I actually have deep down. Like, that's what it looks like living over here. But living by faith, it means living over here and living secure that God deeply loves you. He's not going anywhere. That he's done all the work that it takes to make you acceptable and bring you near. He's forgiven everything. He's with you. He's not going to push you away. That's what this looks like. It makes me think of the image of water skiing. Has anyone ever gone water skiing before? So I grew up in the desert, but we would sometimes go water skiing. We would visit my grandma. She lived over by Vegas, and we'd go to Lake Mead, and sometimes we'd go water skiing. And when you go water skiing, to go anywhere, you're not actively doing anything. Like, your goal is to balance and to hold on. Like, that's all you do, is just hold on to the handle, and the boat is going to take you where it needs to go. Like, our Christian life it's not passive. You're not just sitting on your hands and thinking, okay, God's going to do what God's going to do. You're active in faith, in holding on to the promises of God, and in his promises that I have a secure identity, that I've been made acceptable, and I don't need to do anything more than that, than what he's done. I don't need to add anything to the work he's done to make myself acceptable. But it's saying I'm going to hold on to these promises that God is at work, and I'm going to live out of that. And when we can live out of that place, that's where we start getting free to love other people without needing anything in return, without needing their approval, without needing something back from them, any kind of compliment or any kind of acceptance, because we already have that acceptance. God's already given it to us. I think one of the hard things about this is that it can feel very ambiguous. It doesn't sound concrete. It doesn't sound like, okay, we're going to read one chapter a day every day in our Bibles, and then we're going to fast on Fridays, and we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And not that there's something wrong with those things, but there's a part of this where it's not real set in stone, and it's not entirely straightforward. What then do we do? So here's a couple of practical things that I want you to think about. In response to this, I want you to spend some time asking God, what are the things that I lean on as my crutch? Or what is my identity? Apart from you, when I doubt that I really am accepted, what are the things that I actually look to? Like practically, is it something like sports? Is it something like grades? For me, I really wanted to be known as smart and a good kid. Still now, I want to be known as smart, and I want to be known as a person with character and integrity. The other things, those can fall by the wayside, but those are the things that I fall back on and that I have to fight and say, man, there's a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me. Like, what am I doing when I say something that's actually dumb? What thoughts am I thinking about myself? And so I want you to ask God about this. What things do you turn to, and why do you turn to those things? Like, why does it matter that you are a good athlete or whatever it is? Why is it those things? And pray with God about this. And as you're praying with God, remember that there's promises about God, that God has made you that you're doubting. Like, that's the draw. That's when we turn to these other things, we're compensating because we're doubting something about what God has said about us. And so in that moment, what I want you to do is bring other people in your life into this. Share with them about the struggle, share with them about the doubt. But then we need people to empathize with us and to listen. But we also need people to say, okay, remind me again of what is reality. Like, remind me again how this isn't how I feel. I don't feel like God really likes me that much, but I need you to remind me, how does God actually see me? Because right now, I don't see it. Right now, that feels really far off. And we need people walking alongside us for this. Our Christian life isn't that we believe the gospel one time. It's that we're living by faith, meaning we're believing the gospel day in and day out and coming back to believing it. See, when we have this self-doubt and when we question our worthiness, we said there's two ways that we can turn. We can turn to our attributes, the things we're good at. But if we go there, it's not going to take us anywhere. It's just going to lead us to disappointment. And we're going to start hating and resenting the things that we're actually gifted in because it's not going to meet the need that we're hoping. The alternative and what the gospel says is available to us is the promise that God deeply loves us and he's done all that is necessary for us to be accepted and to be worthy. This is something that you're going to struggle with. This is something that every Christian struggles with, and you're not alone with these doubts. So what I want to ask you to do, and what I want to encourage you to do, is relate to God through this. Tell God about what things are on your mind about this, and ask him to reveal to you more about why is it that you turn to those things, and when do you turn to those things. And I want you to turn to and bring in other people that are safe. Your Christian brothers and sisters. Bring guys like Danny and Tim. Maybe not Jason. But bring in other people and let them walk through you with this. You need people like this in your life. Let me pray for us.